Hello, today we're going to talk about using Nearpod with your students on the iPad. Nearpod is an amazing presentation tool that allows you to use interactive presentations where videos can be embedded within the middle, quizzes, tests, checks for understanding that the teacher gets immediate feedback on while the kids are still watching the presentation. It's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and take a look here. We're on nearpod.com. This is the website you will use to actually set up your presentations, and we'll talk about how to do that here in just a second. But I'm going to go ahead and log in. If you didn't already have a account, you could of course create one. I already had one, so we're logged in here. Now first of all, let's talk about creating a presentation. To create a presentation, we're just going to click on Create. You're going to notice I already have a couple in here, but I'm going to go ahead and click on New Presentation. Now the really cool thing about starting a presentation is, let's say you have a pre-made PowerPoint. Many people have PowerPoints that they've saved from previous years or they've already created. You don't have to recreate those. You can actually import them directly into Nearpod. So let's go ahead and pull up a presentation that I've used before. This particular presentation is something that I did on the second day of class. It was essentially to go over some expectations, and it's something that would be pretty easy to use again. So what we need to do in order to use this with Nearpod is to File, Save As, and save that presentation down here under Format. We want to save that presentation as a PDF. I'm saving it to the desktop. That's also not a bad idea because then you can drag it into Nearpod directly, and I'll show you that in a moment. Now we have this box where on Nearpod I can grab that PDF presentation, drag it directly in, and Nearpod will automatically convert those to Nearpod slides instead of PowerPoint slides. After a few moments, now I have my PowerPoint slides already within Nearpod. Now here's where it gets really cool. In Nearpod, I can embed quizzes, polls, and checks for understanding, pre-tests within the presentation itself. So here I talk about various good things to know about my classroom. A lot of them are just general things you would want to know, since again this is the second day of class that I would be running this. So let's go ahead and add a feature. Now there's various features. You can add another slide, you could put a poll of some kind, you could ask a question, do a mini quiz, import a video, even ask students to draw something. Let's go ahead and do a mini quiz. You can add more than one question within the quiz. You can in fact, add many questions. We're going to add one question because I think on that previous slide I talk about turning in work. So maybe a question I would ask for understanding is, where do you turn in paper work in my classroom? It's on my desk. Do you put it in the trash can? Or do you place it in the basket in back? Right? Pretty simple answer here. But then I can add the correct answer. I would put a green check next to it. Okay? Now, a couple options here. I can move and rearrange the questions. I can delete that answer. We're just going to go with this one question. Obviously, as a teacher, you can imagine there are many questions you might ask in the middle of a presentation to get immediate feedback. We're going to go ahead and save that. So that is one example of something that you could embed within your Nearpod. And actually, I just realized it's in the wrong section. All right. On this next slide, I talk about expectations, behavior expectations. So maybe I would add another one. And let's do something kind of fun. Let's do a draw it. And why don't I ask kids to draw what it would look like to be respectful. I can either have an empty canvas or I could do a background image that the kids would then be drawing over. So imagine if you were a math teacher and you wanted kids to graph something so that you could see whether or not they could do that, you could use a background image of graph paper and then ask the students to draw on top of it. Pretty cool option. All right, or in another class, maybe you have a picture and you know, in science, you put up a picture of a bug and you have kids diagram the parts of that bug. So that's pretty cool. All right, let's save that. All right, I think that's good as an example of what Nearpod can do. Obviously, there are 1,000,001 ways that you could use this in your classroom. That's just a really quick overview of how to set it up. I'm going to go ahead and hit done. Now, this is something that's really easy to forget. When I am completely finished with that presentation, in order for me to be able to use it with students, on this page here in my library, I want to click on the presentation I would like to use and make sure over here I hit this arrow button that says publish. Okay? If I do not publish that presentation, you cannot use that presentation with the kids. It needs to be published. And I'm getting a warning here that says you need to include a final non-interactive slide. I neglected to remember that you can't end with an activity. So let's go ahead and flip that. And again, we're going to go back and make sure that we publish that. Good to know, actually, that came up. You can't start with an interactive slide and you can't end with an interactive slide. So that's something to keep in mind as you're using Nearpod. All right, so now that we've talked about actually setting up the Nearpod presentation, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what a teacher would do with their iPad and what a student would do with their iPad when we're actually running a Nearpod presentation. For your purposes, on the left-hand side, we are going to be taking a look at the teacher iPad. On the right-hand side, we're going to be watching the student iPad. And you'll see the difference between the two. So first of all, let's take a look on the left-hand side as the teacher. I'm going to go ahead and log into my account, same one I used on the computer, and you must log into the Nearpod app on your iPad. Logging into the website will not help you if you're trying to run a presentation with your kids. You need to use the Nearpod app. Okay, so now that I've logged in, I can see the two presentations that I've published. Remember, only published presentations can be run with the kids. So I've got that one on the far left there. That purple presentation is the one I created for today. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it's going to ask me to launch it. This presentation has an active session. Do you want to resume it? No, I was running it before, so now I'm going to run it again, and I'm going to hit submit. Now there's a couple things to be paying attention to here. The first one is along the left-hand side here. You see a little person with a number next to them. That is your way as a teacher of recording whether or not your students are in a session. So as soon as they enter a session, that number will go up. If you see that number go down, it means kids are going off somewhere else on their iPad. So that's kind of a nice feature. Also next to that is your PIN number. That's the number students need to enter in order to enter your presentation. So on their iPad, when they launch Nearpod, let's go over to the student side here, they're going to go down to student and they're going to enter that PIN. That PIN will be different every time you launch the presentation. It's not always the same. So right now it's FNFFB. I'm going to hit OK, and as a student, I'm going to see what the teacher sees. As the teacher, on the left, I'm going to flip to the next slide. This is always going to ask students to enter their name. Okay? If you would like students to enter their last name, you can ask them to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and put my first name, my last initial, and hit submit as a student. Now as a teacher, I'm going to get a readout of all the students who have joined my session. Okay, so if I had 15 students, I would see 15 names here. I would also see the number up here turn to 15. So if it went down to 14, I know somebody wandered off elsewhere. All right, once everyone's entered their name as the teacher, I'll flip the slide again. We'll talk about this slide. We'll talk about this slide. Notice how every time I flip it, it automatically flips for the student as well. They can't go back. They can't go forward. It will be locked on the slide that the teacher has designated. All right, let's go to the next slide. Remember, that's where we had the quiz. So on my side as a teacher, I'm going to be getting results. On the student side, I'm going to see the quiz. So let's hit go. As the student, I'll answer the question. For our purposes, I answered the question correctly. So I'm going to hit next. And I can go back as the student and correct my answers if I was like, not sure. Once I hit next again, then it actually submits them. On the teacher end, I'm going to get a couple of things. All my students will be listed. I'll see their score, so how many they got right, how many they got wrong, and I'll also see an overall percentage amongst everybody of what they got correct and what they didn't. So right now 100% of students got the answers correct. That's because we only had one question and only one answer, and I answered it correctly. Now here's something to know. As a student, I won't see whether or not I got the correct answers unless the teacher hits this share button right here. So if you want students to have immediate feedback, hit the share button. If you don't, for whatever reason, don't hit the share button. I'm going to go ahead and hit the share button just so you can see what students would see. They would get their total score as well as the percentage correct. They could also down below click my answers, and they could go through all the questions. So if you had 10 questions in your quiz, they could go back and they could see the correct answer, and they could also see the answer that they entered. Pretty cool feedback for a kid and for the teacher. I'll also show you on the website how you can go back and look at downloadable reports of all of the quizzes as well. All right, let's go on. So we talk about expectations. Then remember on that next slide, I had I entered the slide where kids could draw something. So why don't I take my pen, and it asks me to draw what it looks like to be respectful. For the sake of time, I won't get too detailed. I'm going to go ahead as a student and hit submit. And then as a teacher, I will see that image appear on my screen. Again, I'll have all the students, all their images. If I see an image that I want everyone to be able to view, maybe there's an amazing exemplar and I want to talk about it with the whole class, I can click on it. I can hit share in the top right hand corner, and now every student will see that picture as well. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I could go back and I could choose another student as well.
Please call 5967.
Sorry about the intercom. That's what happens when you work in schools. All right, so that's the draw feature. And again, there's a lot of ways you could do that. Like I said, if you put up a picture, you could have students draw on it. So students could identify states on a map. Students could draw parts of a body. You know, there's lots of possibilities with this one, using the graph paper in math. All right, there's my last slide. So that is running a Nearpod presentation with kids. You, again, are able to pace it. Kids can't go forward, they can't go backwards. You are able to embed those quizzes. You get immediate feedback. You can give the kids immediate feedback if you want them to be able to see the answers. So these are all really cool options. Last but not least, let's take a look back at Nearpod. I'm going to go to the home button, and let's say I ran 5 quizzes that day because I have 5 different classes. Obviously I couldn't get, you know, all of that in my head. So if I go into reports, choose the presentation that I want and hit submit, I can down below get detailed reports about student responses for the day. I can also export that data into a folder where I can view a spreadsheet of all of their answers. So these are some pretty cool options to you if you are, there it is. Sorry, I had the wrong one initially. So I can get that student's name, I can get how they answered it. The only thing that doesn't show up is that picture, but I can click on it and I can also get a copy of that picture as well. So that is Nearpod. It's a pretty amazing tool, and I hope you find it helpful within your classrooms.